announcement at the end of one of the first lectures saying if there was anybody in the student body who had difficulty in hearing or seeing, if they'd give him a slip with their name on at the end of the lecture, he'd arrange for them to sit on the front couple of rows. Now, Baird was reasonably short-sighted, and when he got to the front of the lecture hall, his way was blocked by three fairly large gentlemen, and one of these three guys turned round and said in a very aggressive tone, "What's wrong with you? Are you deaf or blind?" And there was some exchange of words, shall we say, and that guy was John Reith.
But Reith's descendants take a rather different view.
Logie Baird thought he was a bully.
I think that Reith genuinely wanted to help Logie Baird out of his own confused picture of television.
Do you think he resented television?
Oh, I think so. I think so. The BBC presented him with a set, one of those amazing things that you now see in museums, with a lid and a mirror, which adjusts an upside-down image below it. My brother and I thought this was absolutely marvellous, but it really was never on. And there was no concessions made to us that we might be perhaps interested.
Did he watch television?
No. No, he never did.
And what about you? Were you allowed to watch television? No.
No. No.
Unlike Reith, Logie Baird had been obsessed with the idea of television since childhood. In the early 1920s, he began experimenting with it. His mechanical system was based on something called a Nipkow disc, after the German inventor who constructed a circle with holes round the edge in a spiral. Images were scanned by bright light being shone through the holes. The fragments formed a picture which was then transmitted via radio waves to the receiver. It's hard to believe now, but whilst Baird was transmitting from his offices in London, his pictures were being received as far away as North Africa. In fact, anyone, anywhere in the world who had access to medium wave radio could pick up his signals on their homemade television sets. Baird's first demonstration to the public was at Selfridges in London in 1925. It was seen as a success, and within a few years, he was manufacturing his televisor receiver for people to view the broadcasts in their own homes.
The love song of nature caressing your ear will tell you that springtime is hovering near. The spirit of gladness is bringing good cheer. Wake up, children, wake up.
At just 30 lines, the images were sketchy but visible. Here, thanks to an amateur recording on disc, we can see Betty Bolton singing in 1934.
Now's the time to get your share.
The achievement is all the more remarkable because although Baird had begun recording pictures on disc, he never found a way of playing them back. The government saw something in television that Reith couldn't, and in 1929 he was told to give Baird access to the BBC's transmitter after radio shut down each night. Baird broadcast experimental TV programmes like this as a ghost in the radio machine for 6 full years.
Didn't you have to be slightly mad to want to own a receiver in these circumstances? One or two sort of fuzzy faces from
Well, I think it was the excitement of the age. I mean, just think about the period we're talking about, the end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s. Think of the inventions that have happened. We've got talking pictures in the cinema. We've got machines that fly through the air. We've got airships. We've got all these wonderful inventions. We've got radio. Electricity is slowly coming into people's homes. By the time you get to about 1930, it's about 1 house in 3 has got electric light. And so people were very into the latest technology, like we are today.
But Reith wasn't into technology, certainly not when it concerned television. His daughter, Marissa Leishman, has written a revealing book, My Father, Reith of the BBC.
Very nice to see you. Congratulations. You sign this to a dedicated fan.
She last visited the Director General's office at the age of 4 and wanted her family to see where Reith managed his empire from.
So from the beginning, the possibility of television was something he resisted until finally it was enforced on him, wasn't it?
Yes, yes, that's right. So the thing had got beyond his prevention, so to speak.
Did he ever come round to television?
No. No.
How much do you yourself listen in and look at television?
None at all.
Not at all?
Not at all, neither.
Were you not interested in the programs after you left?
When I leave a thing, Mr. Freeman, I leave it.
In 1938, he left this building, finally, and in tears. A god in ruins. Why, having ushered in the future with radio, did he do so much to prevent it when it came to television? By television, he was becalmed. There should be no visual frivolity in the BBC.
The BBC creed was to inform, to educate, to entertain, but he couldn't really quite get to grips with to entertain. Is that true?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I could imagine that he would be the kind of child who would never have really known how to play. And there was always, I think, the encouragement at home, spoken or unspoken, you must be getting on with something useful rather than having a good time.
And you reveal in your book, amazingly, that it wasn't Reith who came up with that famous phrase, but RCA's David Sarnoff.
Yes, but he put it in a different order. Entertainment, information, and as an afterthought, education. Reith just turned them round. And everybody thought it was his. But it wasn't.
He nicked it.
Yes, he nicked it.
And it was David Sarnoff's previous employer, Marconi, who stopped television from being a one-man race in Britain. They joined forces with EMI to work in competition against Baird, devising an electronic television system using cathode ray tubes. By 1934, the results of both teams were promising enough to warrant a government inquiry. They decided that the country should have a television service, but in a typical British fudge, they couldn't decide who should provide it, so employed both Baird and Marconi EMI for a trial period. They would broadcast from Alexandra Palace with a transmitter large enough to cover London and the home counties. The cost of building the studios was around £200,000, to be paid for with the existing radio licence fee. This was a huge amount when the country was in the middle of a depression. So, in fact, the BBC was sort of obliged, forced really, by the government and by the Post Office to start a television service, officially.
They were, yes.
Over Reith's dead bodies, yes. Of course, by now, the rest of the world was experimenting with television too, all wanting to broadcast the first regular service. But unlike Lord Reith, Dr. Goebbels could see TV's potential for his country, Germany.
The 12th German radio exhibition is opened by Propaganda Minister Dr. Goebbels.
Goebbels was put in charge of propaganda by the Nazi Party, and he saw television as a suitable tool. Now, if you're using this as a propaganda medium, what you don't want to do is to pipe it into people's homes, because then how can you check that they're watching it? So the German idea was to have viewing parlours. So normally 30 to 40 people would go along to watch a TV programme to get the message.
Back in Britain, Alexandra Palace was nearly ready, and the plan was to begin a daily, scheduled service that the public could watch from home. The workforce expected 4 months to practice before they went live on air, but it wasn't to be. Cecil Madden was the programme planner.
The director of television told us all our jobs, and he said, I want to make it absolutely clear you won't have to do any programs for 4 months. So we all left Broadcasting House and we went out there, and there was a phone in the corner and the phone was going. So with some trepidation I picked up the phone and he said, Cecil, wash out everything I said. Everything has changed. Now don't muck about. I want you to know that television starts in 9 days' time. Who wants to produce the first program? No one did. So I said, I am the senior man. No one has had any experience, so I take this on. I am the producer. Now, who is going to help? And then everybody wanted to help.
Now, cameras, please. Here are the instructions. We're using all three of you in this scene.
Cue, Mr. Mitchell.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Hold it. Stop again, please, stage manager. Why has that happened? What's camera 2 showing?
The story of that 9-day countdown to the opening of the Ali Pali studios was so extraordinary that writer Jack Rosenthal made it the subject of his 1986 drama, The Fools on the Hill. Cecil Madden was central to the story.
In case I forget to say it at the time, good luck, studio.
Good luck, Mr. Mitchell.
No, not at all.
Beg your pardon, sir?
I thought you asked me if I was feeling a bit queasy.
Confused? Well, this is the real Leslie Mitchell. Unbelievably, in fact as well as fiction, Cecil Madden and the rest of the team pulled everything together, and BBC Television began on time.
And number 2, you start on the caption, keep screwed up high, and after the first caption, turn and dolly onto the set.
The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
This is direct television from the studios at Alexandra Palace. And now you're going to see and hear someone you know well, Miss Helen Mackay. Looking at you from out of the blue. Don't make a fuss, but settle down and look at us.
But surprisingly, Baird himself wasn't invited to the opening night celebrations.
I said, Mr. Baird, where are you going? He said, I don't know where I'm going. He said, I haven't been invited. I just couldn't understand it. We program people, my people, are very disappointed that Baird himself didn't take part in the official opening.
One by one they play their parts.
And there's a bigger mystery still. Legend has it that Reith stormed out of the studio halfway through the opening.
We haven't even got to the middle. I've seen enough, thank you.
But this version of events is apocryphal. Was Reith really there at all?
Was your father there or wasn't he?
I have to be completely honest and say the greater likelihood is that he wasn't there. Because when the question of television was being discussed, he delegated. Or if there was some very important occasion, oh, it was extraordinary, Reith is on holiday at that time. So my feeling is that probably he wasn't there.
He was on holiday, just conveniently happened to be on holiday.
Just happened to have to be at that time. For a man who really didn't very much enjoy holidays.
So the television service went ahead for 3 months. Baird's mechanical system was producing 240-line pictures in Studio B, and Marconi EMI's electronic cathode ray tube system in Studio A was achieving 405.
The mosaic inside the tube, when scanned by a cathode ray, transforms the optical image thrown upon it into a series of electrical impulses.
The Marconi EMI system was absolute cutting edge. It involved breakthroughs in glass technology, in vacuum physics, in atomic physics, in electronics. You had 3 cameras. You could move the cameras around. That's television as we know it today.
So if it was so superior, where did that leave Baird?
The Baird system should never have been entertained by the Selsdon Committee in the first place.
Why?
Because mechanical television's a dead end. For live TV, for announcements, they had a thing called the Spotlight Studio, which was a nightmare. So if you could imagine taking your presenter, head and shoulders only, into a completely darkened room, the poor old presenter could not see anything, so you couldn't read a script. You had to wear this funny makeup because it was over red sensitive, so you had to wear yellow makeup and blue lipstick and blue earlobes so that the system could see you reasonably clearly. And now we come on to the pièce de résistance, which was the Baird intermediate film process. The film came out through a small hole in the bottom of the camera and went into developer, into fixer, and into water, and while still wet, it was telecined by an underwater telecine machine to convert it into television.
I feel I understand now.
Yes, it was a complete disaster as a system.
Complete disaster.
Baird was in a panic because the only fixer that they knew of at that time that was fast enough was cyanide solution. So you had a tank of cyanide solution that eventually, because the heat came over from the developer, would start to fume and you're in a sealed double-glazed cubicle. So by the time you get the smell of bitter almonds, it's too late, you're dead.
Oh, hell. Oh, excuse the language, lady. It's the cyanide again. Oh, don't touch it! The cameraman spilled his ruddy fixing fluid again. Extinguish us as fast as you can.
Stand quite still.
No, not me, you fool, Miss Mackay's frock.
The writer of The Fools on the Hill, Jack Rosenthal, lived in the shadow of Ali Pali with his wife, Maureen Lipman.
When Jack was doing the research for Fools on the Hill, is that when you first realised what had happened over there, its history?
Well, he was never one for doing a great deal of research, but I think, you know, once the story of the race had got through to him, that there was Marconi and that there was Baird, and it seems, it's always like that, isn't it? But certainly with Ali Pali, that became the focal part of the play. And then, of course, being Jack, he threw in the sort of hierarchical thing of Ali Pali, the fact that the technicians wore brown coats and the staff wore white coats, and that they wore gloves, and you didn't speak unless you were spoken to. And then it was a question of, right, we'll do the Baird studio first, and then we'll do the Marconi studio.
In true British style, they tossed a coin to see who would go first.
John? Tails. Tails it is. We go on the air from the Baird studio.
But the great British compromise could only go on for so long. It quickly became clear that the Baird system was going nowhere. And in January 1937, it was dropped.
How did Baird take that?
He was gutted, absolutely gutted. And I think the way that he'd been treated by people like Reith and certain other people within the BBC made him feel that somebody had stolen his baby, stolen his idea.
I can't bear the thought of poor John Logie Baird, who was so brilliant, just ending up disappointed and in a bedsit somewhere in Bayswater. Oh, stop.
In fact, after being dispatched by the BBC, Baird improved his earlier inventions, such as colour TV, 3D stereoscopic TV, telecine, infrared TV, and video disc recordings. He didn't make his fortune, but he did try to secure his place in history.
It is now 12 years ago since I produced the first little flickering television image. Television has grown from a scientific novelty to a commercial service. But who can foretell the future?
Buying a television set in the pre-war era could set you back a small fortune. Over there at the top of the range, that's not just a Rolls-Royce model, that would set you back the price of a Rolls-Royce. You can get Baird and Marconi on that at the flick of a switch. If you're more interested in the sort of family saloon type price, this is a Marconi model over here. On the opening night, of course, there were only 400 televisions. By 1937, after a year, there were 2,000, and of course, the price came down.
If hardly anyone had seen television programmes in the early days, nobody in the BBC had ever worked on them. A small team at Ali Pali was setting the standard for the rest of the world to follow.
Unbelievable.
Richard,
Yes.
back from your cruise, I understand. Yes.
This is it.
This is it.
This is it. You ready?
Yes.
Is everyone ready?
Yes.
Come in.
Yes, I'm in.
Studio A.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Well, this would be our studio, then.
This is it.
Yes.
Oh.
Don't you recognise it? The gallery's up there.
Yes. Is that where the original gallery was? It was up there.
Yeah.
It's up a horrible flight of stairs.
This is Studio A, isn't it?
Yes.
Or was?
Yes.
This is Studio A. This is the
This is the big studio.
the EMI studio.
Yes, that's right.
EMI Marconi studio, not the
That's
Baird. The Baird got the thumbs down, didn't it? So this studio would have been shared by all the different productions, isn't that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yes, you would.
Well, we did pantomimes in here, you know, really big things.
Yes.
Amazing.
And they would have, I mean, for a drama production, they'd have sets.
You'll as often see me and my co-announcers sitting in apparent comfort like this. And they may think that I'm just sitting in a quiet, comfortable room. But in fact, as you can see, our studios are pretty busy. And they're like this every day of the year.
Would your debuts, yours and Richard's and Marguerite's, would they have all been in here?
I
Come
was
here,
in
Marguerite.
Studio A, I think. I can't remember. My audition was in this studio.
Oh, was it?
Yes, one of them was, yes.
She was an absolute star, Sylvia, because her memory was so good. No water cue, of course, so they were given a piece of news, weren't you?
Yeah.
You had to memorise.
And
she was through with flying colours.
Silence on the floor.
Your announcer.
This is the BBC television service. Good evening and welcome to Alexandra Palace, which has been opened for one day only to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the world's first high-definition television service.
On this day, not quite 400 years ago, the first Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne of England. In a week's time, our own Queen, Elizabeth II, leaves for her first visit as Queen to her dominions overseas.
Did you think this television thing had much staying power?
Yes, it was fascinating, and I was quite fascinated by it. And we were really making it up as we went along. I mean, we had nothing to go on, if you think about it. Most of us hadn't seen any television. So you were just kind of thrown in at the deep end. I had to be available for breakdowns.
And they happen quite often, did they?
All the time, yes. Yes, and first of all, we just used to say we'd play them some music. And then they got to the interlude films, which we used to put on. The Kitten with the Ball of Wool and all that, and the Potter's Wheel.
It was sort of rather mesmeric.
It was mesmeric, yes, and you get wondering what he was making. We never found out. And then we'd chat and say, you know, sorry about this. Would you like to go and have a cup of tea? And I'll tell you when I've got the picture back again. It must seem funny to you today because it's all so slick, isn't it? And slick it was not.
Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to Woman in the Home.
Another one of the early stars was television cook Marguerite Patten.
I feel sure there's something to interest every one of you. Well, this afternoon, as you can see, I'm ready for action in the kitchen of our studio.
Just before I was due to do the first programme, the BBC rang me up and said, Marguerite, we're so sorry, we haven't got a cooker. Now, I thought, to do a cookery demonstration.
Helps.
So I said, well, what have you got? Oh, we got a boiling ring. So I had to plan 8-minute donuts, because I told you can only have 8 minutes, Marguerite. So I had to make the dough, dried egg, little margarine, and they really were very much more like a fritter than a donut. But then with gay abandon, when they were cooked, I rolled them in sugar, as if sugar, you know, wasn't rationed. And I think possibly I instituted the famous words, and here is one I made.
Your debut, Rich, was that must have been in this studio.
I remember on one occasion the script was too long for the picture, and this sub-editor who'd written the story suddenly shoved his hand over my mouth to stop me talking.
Stop you?
Yes.
Oh, good job you weren't envisioned.
But you know, all that added to the excitement, because they were short of studios, and while you could be getting ready for cooking in the morning, somebody over there might be balancing, they were going to do ballet or something.
Yes.
Did it feel that this was a big new moment?
Oh, well, no question about it. In 1937, 30 and 39, you know, we put on an hour's programme in the afternoon and an hour in the evening, and it was terribly exciting. And one really sort of often didn't complete a rehearsal. You were lucky if you completed a rehearsal.
The television service was in full swing, despite precious little encouragement from BBC management. They, of course, were far too busy doing important things, like making radio programmes.
Let's be clear, there was a disdain for television among radio people.
I've been having second thoughts about this, and I'd like to hear more from the music department about the idea.
Well, the listener's not expected to...
They thought that honourable people, the way they were, did not possess a television set, and television was slightly beneath them. Television was there as entertainment, and radio was there as a serious medium.
We were very much the poor relations of the sound broadcasting. We were that ghastly little place on top of the hill that was a bit of a nuisance, without any doubt at all.
Yes, the people at the top of the hill, yes.
National Program London. Begin to see
So why had the government decided, against the wishes of BBC management, to set up a luxury television service for very few viewers in the middle of the 1930s depression?
Why put money into television when you've only got 400 viewers? What were they thinking about?
What were they thinking?
There were certain senior members of the cabinet who felt that war with Germany was impending and inevitable, and it would do us good to have manufacturing capability in electronics, particularly the manufacture of cathode ray tubes, which formed the basis of the radar display, the radar receiver.
Could it be that the start of television had just been a smokescreen for the British government getting ready for war? Either way, on the 1st of September 1939, in the middle of Mickey Mouse's X-rated on-screen kiss with Greta Garbo, television was unceremoniously shut down.
I think I'll keep you now.
And an ominous message was broadcast to the nation.
Unfortunately, I hadn't watched it that afternoon, so I didn't really know it had closed down and came into really an empty place. And only about 6 of us were there. Quite incredible. And of course, war was declared on the Sunday.
The official line that was given was that the government were worried that the Luftwaffe would use the transmissions from Alexandra Palace to help them to direction find and bomb London. I think the main reason was they wanted the engineers. They wanted them for the radar effort.
Radar, once a top secret, is still a mystery to most people. Special pictures now help to elucidate the device which did more to win the war than any other scientific development. The cathode ray tube, such as is used in television, is the heart of radar. It acts as a screen, registering radio short waves transmitted by the sender. When the waves strike an object like a plane, they're reflected back, are picked up and recorded.
The Germans used radio signals to guide their aircraft to London, calculating exactly where to drop their bombs to maximum effect. But the British engineers conceived a cunning plan to confuse and outwit them.
They piped the received signal from the received German beacon up to the Alexandra Palace transmitter and rebroadcast the signal, which had the effect of deflecting the beam. And so the German bombers were confidently dropping bombs over the open fields of Kent, thinking that they were flattening London.
So Alexandra Palace saved London from even worse devastation.
Yeah.
Unlike the Brits, German television continued through the war, with public shows transmitted to theatres because there were no receivers in the home. And in America, broadcasting had only just begun, when programming was reined in again by a ban on manufacturing TV equipment. By the time victory was achieved, Britain had come to rely heavily on BBC Radio for wartime news and information, and television seemed like a distant memory. But when, on the 7th of June 1946, Ali Pali finally opened up again, it all looked strangely familiar, picking up where it had left off 7 years earlier, with the same seemingly innocuous Mickey Mouse cartoon. Was it sending out a coded business-as-usual message? Britain had won the war and would simply pick itself up, dust itself off, and start all over again, much like BBC television.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Do you remember me, Jasmine Bligh? Well, here we are after a lapse of nearly 7 years, ready to start again.
Jasmine Bligh was the face in front of the camera, but behind the scenes, in the studio gallery, a young vision mixer, Beryl Hockley, was in control.
You famously faded up the first TV pictures.
Yes.
After when television service was resumed at the end of the war.
Yes, and there was a picture of me with a headline of 20,000 wait for Beryl. And that was the number of viewers we had, 20,000. There were very few girls, and I think I was the youngest because I don't think they recruited any more after me. And the first morning I came up here, Bertie Baker, who was the senior engineer then, looked at me and he said, I didn't want to have any women on my staff. He said, they only cause trouble with the men. But he said, you get the same money, which was very unusual. We were paid by our grades. And he said, you can do exactly the same job as the men. And no one knew, really, what television was all about. And they built a psych. about a yard in from the wall, a grey stretch side, which they divided into about 11 different pieces. One with a little cookery bit, one with a bit of review, which was very popular at that time, one with Petula Clark singing. She was a little girl. She sang Miser, Miser.
He missed his golden opportunity. Miser, miser, counting gold. What you gonna do when you grow old? Miser, miser, kids all say that old man will give a dime away.
Do you remember Miser, Miser?
How could I forget? And it used to come up day after day. I think it was their sort of demonstration thing that they used to put on. It was all a bit strange and a little bit scary. And then they put this strange makeup on me. We had black lips for some reason. And I was wearing this really dreadful dress, my poor little thin arm sticking out the side. It was a bit sad.
Who were the faces of television, as far as you were concerned?
Well, Sylvia Peters was my dad's favourite. I think he was madly in love with her, along with a few million others, I suppose. And MacDonald Hobley, of course, was gorgeous. These were people that suddenly we felt that they were our friends.
Television is essentially the entertainment of the home viewer, and is the family group that our producers and artists normally consider to be their audience.
Friends they may have seemed, but always very well-spoken ones.
By your own fireside. Do believe me when I say that you'll enjoy it so much more when you meet us once again in the intimacy of your home, when you're sitting relaxed in your own armchair.
What was that about? What was that English accent about? The only way I can ever rationalise that accent is that it sort of filtered down from the German king. We got a German king, didn't we? And, of course, he would be speaking like that. And they all talked very clearly. And so did the men. But the men spoke very quickly. That was the whole thing. Everybody spoke like a train.
We're going to show you one of the visitors in our series of outside broadcasts, Golfers in Action. He's going to demonstrate various shots, and he's going to start off with a drive. So now let's get on with the show.
And getting on with the show was exactly what the country was trying to do in the lean years after the war. Leader of the kitchen front, Marguerite Patten, was given the task of keeping the nation's pecker up.
Now, I've got here some of your ingredients, Marguerite. I brought them up. This is what you made famous. Do you recognise that?
I know. I shall have the word spam with me forever and today, because people wrongly suppose we had spam, and more spam. This was like gold. As well as rationing, we had a point system. So you had to have a great family discussion. Shall we have a spam this month? Or shall we have some dried fruit to make a fruit cake?
So spam was a treat, is that what you're telling me?
But we were delighted with spam when we could get it, because it was a new taste.
And this is just straightforward grass?
Straightforward grass, just cut up. It looks all brown, but it's just done up.
Other people were a little more adventurous. In the interests of keeping the nation healthy, Leslie Mitchell volunteered to eat a nutritionally packed plate of grass.
Just cut them up nice.
I'm afraid I don't know which you use.
Well, you use the sharpest knife you can, yes. That's grass, cut up grass in the middle. But I advocated it for the troops, and they jumped at it. I used to take them salads, and they ate it and liked it like anything.
Too much pepper, I'm afraid. Johnny, look. This is just straightforward grass.
Straightforward grass, just cut up. Looks all brown. Grass, just done up.
What have we
done? What have we done?
Are you ready for me?
Yes, yes.
Good.
Aye, Addie, aye, my heart wants to shout out hooray! Hooray! Sing a...
Ian Carmichael was one of the first stage actors to turn into a TV star, and he's still at it today in the period drama The Royal.
Ta-da! Here we go. John Logie Baird has got a lot to answer for.
What was the atmosphere like in Studio 80?
Oh, it was murder, really. It was chaotic. It was nerve-wracking. In this very small studio, you would have 4 cameras, possibly 2 sound booms, bits of set everywhere, your cast, dancers, maybe 6 dancing girls, Eric Robinson and his full orchestra, which was no small combination, I can tell you. Great cables lying all over the floor. You had to watch where you didn't trip over them. And then remember your lines and all this at the same time.
But newer performers were just happy to be getting the exposure. TV brought them to the attention of new and growing audiences.
Do you remember when you first went on the telly?
Oh yeah, I was proud of it and fun, and I did all right. I used to do the imaginary boxing, used to do the falls and all those sort of things, which got laughs. Don't laugh at me, 'cause I'm a fool. I know it's true, 'cause I wrote that. Falling in love is a youthful delight. It starts just before you leave school. It could even start sooner if it weren't for the fact that you're frightened of looking a fool. And hey presto, there's a change. You begin to feel proud when you've chosen a partner and you're out of the crowd. Now you hold hands gently to show that you care, and with a shy little kiss you start an affair.
Was it a strange experience going on with telly? It was all live. Wasn't that quite difficult?
Well, no, I did my stage act sort of thing on television. So it was just same meat, different gravy, as it were, and I got away with it.
Showbiz, light entertainment, was a staple of television in the early 1950s, and there were no surprises about where the material came from.
I think mostly we drew ideas from the theatre, from the music hall, and there seemed to be an interest. Perhaps it was because it was post-war and people hadn't got very far from their own front gardens during the years of the war. There was an interest in everything continental, and particularly, you know, Paris was thought to be a bit risque, and it was all happening there, the nightclubs and the Folies Bergère and all these things. So they persuaded the owner to shut the Lido for a night and flew them to London to do the Lido show in Studio 8 at Alexandra Palace. I mean, can you believe it now? And they came, and it all seemed to happen. And we made a sigh of relief, and we came in the next day saying, well, that wasn't too bad, was it, you know? And the phone rang, and they were all still here. A thick fog had prevented the plane from taking off, or planes taking off, so the Lido was shut for 2 nights.
When the first breath of winter descends upon the Bavarian Alps, cattle have to be brought down from their mountain pastures to winter quarters in the villages. And on beautiful Lake Königssee a few days ago, the last of the herds were being coaxed onto flat-bottomed cattle boats.
No, this isn't a light entertainment programme, but a pre-packaged BBC newsreel item, circa 1950.
The peasants adorned them with garlands and embroidered collars, a time-honoured form of gratitude to the mountain spirits for a benevolent season and a safe return.
Now, back to the Scala Theatre.
So, plenty of stories on film, but what about live news?
There was no such thing as live news. I mean, the television newsreel was a film product, all on 35mm. The BBC didn't have any laboratories to develop the film, so the film had to be developed at some laboratory down in Finsbury Park and then shipped up to Alexandra Palace.
So were you ever underprepared or unprepared?
The news of the day was shown the day afterwards, more often than not, I have to admit. And there were certain sort of terrible days. I mean, the day when King George VI died, the news was announced in the morning on the radio, and television didn't know what to do. I mean, there was no obituary available of King George VI. There were no programs suitable to put out that day. So the decision was made in the best BBC tradition to close down the service as a mark of respect. One knew really that the man was dying, but we didn't have the nous to prepare an obituary in advance.
Sometimes at the very last minute, items of film would appear. The poor producer, I know on one occasion, was completely baffled. He had no idea what was coming up. Run it, whatever it is, he said. Run it, whatever it is. I remember that feeling of desperation that he had.
And this bit seems to be the end.
Okay, quiet everyone.
Here is an illustrated summary of the news. It will be followed by the latest film of
happenings at home and abroad. Despite increased home produce,
Meat supplies have been the Ministry of Food's biggest problem. Quantities still come from Australia and New Zealand, South America.
So you were the first voice on television news, weren't you?
Yes, I was, that's right. And we were not allowed to appear on the screen at all at the beginning of television news, because it was feared, I think, that we would blink or wink or, in other words, show a bit of personality. They didn't want that at all, so we were kept off the screen. And then, of course, there was the threat of ITN going on the air, and we knew that they were going to use personality newscasters. So the BBC very nervously tried out me and Kenneth Kendall on the late-night news summary, the later the better, to see what would happen.
Good evening. Within the last few minutes, we've heard that the Russians have launched another moon rocket.
Did you have autocue?
Not at first, we just sort of looked up and down at the script. And that again was thought to add authority to it. You weren't making this up, you were reading it off a proper script, you know.
And RAF Shackleton from St Morgan in Cornwall reported a short while ago that pieces of wreckage have been sighted about 100 miles off the island.
Run, Bristol, tell us in here.
How did you find that, the sense of being noticed and recognised as television emerged?
It was a complete surprise when people began to sort of recognise one in the street, not always with very flattering results. There was a small boy who came to me one day after I'd been reading the 6 o'clock news. He said, "Can I have your autograph?" I said, "Certainly. Do you know who I am?" He said, "No. Who are you?" I said, "I'm a newsreader." He said, "Never mind. Newsreaders is good swaps." So I was rather cheered by that, really.
By the early 1950s, there were a few more famous faces. And television was beginning to catch on. 80% of a nation's children now had access to their daily dose of favourites.
We want Muffin, Muffin the mule, dear old Muffin playing the fool. We want Muffin, everybody sing. We want Muffin the mule.
There was a permanent set. It was only a flat on the top of the grand piano. The only thing was to choose a wallpaper with stripes so that you didn't see the strings, was hopefully.
Thieves, beware! Dick Muffin waves his tail. He rounds them up and he tracks them down, follows them round and round the town, wearing a most important crown. Dick Muffin's on the trail, bravo, Dick Muffin.
And if you were old enough or brave enough to stay up,
All that just now, roaring flames. Oh my God, Len, it's something dreadful.
In 1953, in Studio A, I did the Quatermass experiment. This was the first of them. It was done as a 6-part Saturday night serial. And I don't think there were any film inserts at all. I think it was all done live.
It is Victor, Victor.
He's alive, thank God. Sit down.
Quatermass! Get Professor Quatermass! He's in the plant now, alone. Quatermass!
I loved Quatermass, but then I loved listening to the radio when I was a kid, listening to Dick Barton and all that stuff, and you could imagine all this, what was going on, but then suddenly to have it right there in front of your eyes was amazing. And I didn't realize then, but these people who were producing these shows were working probably on a shoestring, but they were using their imagination and, dare I say, talent to do it. Wonderful.
I hope they realise this is for their own benefit.
Look, it's starting to break up.
Can you smell it?
Yes.
Ammonia. Dylan, there's something on your face.
It's become terribly famous, and everybody kind of remembers it. Of course, there was only one channel then, and everybody talked about the television program the night before, next day, and everybody watched them.
We get out of the studios into the outside world, not only by using film material, but also by actually taking television cameras on outside broadcasts. So now I'm going to hand you over to the outside broadcast department.
OBs, or outside broadcasts, were growing in popularity. The Ali Pali team brought live events to the nation that would never have been thought possible before.
To those who enjoyed the television visit to the Hammersmith Palais last July,
It will be good news that television will be visiting a dance hall again during the evening of the 7th of October.
But sometimes just laying the cables was a marathon in itself.
When we did an outside broadcast of Middleton's garden across the road, and Middleton used to have he was the gardener at that time, and he had his garden across the road there, we had to put out almost 1,000 feet of cable across the road in about 20-yard lengths with these damn connectors. And when we get out there on the Saturday morning, the cameras wouldn't work, and you'd have to go through all these connectors one by one, checking to make sure it worked.
The OB unit was a boys' own affair, run by Peter Dimmock, a former RAF pilot.
Good. Now we come to Zoo. Keith, I'd like you to move that forward 1 week if you can. Can you manage it?
Yes, I think I can. Excuse me, Keith. Peter, if you finish with me, I think I'll push off to Speedway.
Right, I'll be down about 4:30. Then we come to the fire display. Richard, I believe you're going to do the commentary for that and discuss the details with Barry this morning.
Yes, it's in the Dimbleby Diary.
And by far the biggest event in the Dimbleby Diary was on June the 2nd, 1953.
Here, in the Abbey Church of St. Peter, Westminster, a great congregation of 7,000, come from every part of the world, awaits the arrival of Her Majesty.
Thanks to the BBC's outside broadcast team, a rather larger audience of 20 million people were able to join the invited guests in the Abbey. A high figure even by today's standards, and quite astonishing for the time. And radio finally took a back seat to television. The British public wanted to see, and not just hear, their Queen being crowned.
The coronation was, without doubt, the turning point in the history of BBC television. This was the one event which everybody wanted to see. Whether they had a set at home or not, somehow or other everybody managed to see the coronation. 2 weeks before, it was unthinkable having live coverage because the government was against it, the Director General and the governors didn't think it was the world's greatest idea, but because Peter Dimmock persuaded the Duke of Norfolk as the old Marshal that it was a good idea, it worked.
And for the OB team, there was an unusual bonus for working round the clock. Every member of staff was given a picnic to get them through the day.
They gave us a box with this explosive soup in, and so you lit the fuse at the bottom and the soup was heated up. And a bottle of wine.
A bottle of wine? Weren't you doing a live broadcast?
Oh, yeah.
It was only a small bottle. It wasn't a whole bottle, was it? It was only half bottle.
Yeah, but
I don't think they'd do that today.
And because we were there from crack of dawn, you know.
5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, yes.
The cameras were set up in the afternoon for tests.
And you were the one who introduced the coronation, Sylvia.
Yes, I did.
How was it for you, as they say?
Well, it was nerve-wracking because I had to learn a very long opening announcement, and of course I couldn't make a mistake because it was going out live.
Do you remember what you had to say?
No, of course I don't.
The Queen today is dedicating herself before God to the service of her subjects. And for the first time in history, through the medium of television, the ancient and noble rite of a coronation service will be witnessed by millions of Her Majesty's subjects.
Well, there must have been 30 of us in our living room with the Bush 9-inch. And we all had flags, special blue and white and red cake and things.
You couldn't put a pin between the people in 1953 in my sitting room, and I fed them. And I had to feed them on things that they could eat like that because there was no room to do that.
I remember feeling that, wow, you know, we're actually watching it while it's happening. You know, we are really part of it. And I think that's where television really comes into its own, even to this day.
But never before have so many seen the crowning of the sovereign, or so many shared in her dedication in this Abbey Church.
In November of coronation year, a debate began in Parliament to end the BBC's monopoly, and after much protest from the corporation, ITV opened in 1955 with this trailer, promising mass entertainment with wide appeal.
I think one of the most deplorable mistakes ever made in public affairs was made when the BBC monopoly was broken. I think it was shocking.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Reith was sulking for nearly 20 years, and then ITV looms, and there he is back again as a champion of the BBC.
Reith believed in the monopoly. He thought that the BBC was everything, and that should go on forever and a day. I think there were sufficient people within the BBC who realised that that couldn't go on.
You see, I think there was a sort of dichotomy in his mind. The BBC was radio, and there was this intruder called television. And then there was another intruder, independent television. And rather unusually, he spoke in the House of Lords against this. But I think he must have known that the thing was a fait accompli. It would just carry on, as it were.
Well, it did carry on. The BBC survived ITV's arrival, and by 1960, 11 million people had television sets.
Mr. Magpie. Oh, Mr. Magpie.
Aye?
Woo-hoo. Can you hear me, Magpie?
Yes. Must be dreaming.
Oh, no, this isn't a dream.
Going too lally, then.
Not at all, sweetheart. Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Well, viewers have been well and truly sucked into TV in a way that goes far beyond even John Logie Baird's expectations. Today we watch an average of 26 hours a week on our 62 million sets. But sadly, the growth in channels and programmes is something that poor old Ali Pali just couldn't cope with.
So Alexandra Palace, where British television was born and grew up, retires from the fray with dignity and many happy memories of pioneering days. In its empty dressing rooms and studios, only the echo will be heard of an exciting era in our history. Thank you, Ali Pali.
Alexandra Palace is about to be redeveloped, with no immediate plans to keep the studio intact, the world's first television studio.
There should be some kind of museum there, because it was a special moment in our business, if you like, but in our lives. And I would love to see a museum. It could be so interesting and entertaining for the public.
But I think it is important as a landmark that it should stay. Those people who were working so hard to try to put all those bits of string and sealing wax together and create something which is developed into a phenomenal thing. I mean, it's just our life now. What would it be without television? I mean, everything is... I know it's a long time ago, but I just think it's important to respect where something began.
John Logie Baird and pioneered television for the entire world, so it would be dreadful if it were to be turned into something less than in a National Heritage Centre. People should feel very strongly about that, because we started television.
Well, Maureen, the campaign starts here.
Yes, Alan.
And that brings us to the end of programming for today. So, from all of us here at Alexandra Palace, a very good night. Very good night.
We worked so hard, but they were marvellous days.
But it was so enjoyable, and it was so different, and it was so challenging and so invigorating that one loved being there.
I had a charmed life. Very hard work, but I wouldn't have missed a moment of it.
You can listen to personal memories, view clips, and find out more about the early days of television at Alexandra Palace by visiting bbc.co.uk/heritage.
And Imagine returns to explore one of the year's